Every day the elephant stood in the same corner of the sanctuary. And every day he wept. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just slow, silent tears that slipped from his eyes as he stared at the fence and refused to move. It had been going on for months. The staff at the sanctuary tried everything: fresh fruit, longer walks, new companions. But nothing helped. The massive bull elephant named Ramu barely ate, barely moved. He didn't trumpet, didn't bathe, didn't interact with the other elephants. He just stood there, staring, waiting, and crying. It was unlike anything they'd seen before. Elephants could grieve, yes. Everyone knew that. They mourned lost herd members, they remembered separation, trauma, abandonment. But Ramu's pain was different. It wasn't sudden. It was steady. Like a wound that hadn't healed but instead quietly deepened every day. The head caretaker, Leela, began taking notes, documenting his behavior, looking for patterns. She checked his medical history, nothing recent. No physical injury. Blood work was normal. No infection. No neurological trauma. But the weight loss was undeniable. He was fading. Emotionally. Leela brought in a behaviorist. A tall man from Mumbai who had worked with zoo elephants, temple elephants, circus rescues. He observed Ramu for 3 days without saying much. On the 4th day, he stood at the edge of the enclosure and said one word. Memory. Leela turned to him. What do you mean? The man didn't look away from the elephant. He's not reacting to this place, he said. He's reacting to the absence of something that used to be here. Leela frowned. But nothing's changed. We've had the same layout, the same herd, the same staff. Not everything you remember leaves footprints, he said quietly. Sometimes it's just scent. Or sound. Or something you loved so long ago you forgot how to miss it. She didn't know what to say. That night she stayed late. Went through old files. Paper records from before they'd gone digital. Scanned adoption forms, volunteer logs, archived photos. And in one of the oldest folders she found it. A photograph. A young boy, maybe 10, sitting cross-legged beside a baby elephant barely a meter tall, ears oversized for his head. The boy's arms were wrapped around the elephant's neck, his face tilted upward in laughter. On the back of the photo, written in faded ink, Alex, summer 2003. Leela stared at it for a long time. Ramu had arrived at the sanctuary that same year. Rescued from illegal trade. Severely underweight. Traumatized. But over time he had bonded with someone. Everyone remembered it, that foreign kid who was always with him. But no one had mentioned him in years. Leela scanned the photo into her phone. And made it her mission to find him. She didn't expect anything. Maybe he'd forgotten. Maybe he wouldn't respond. Maybe it wasn't even the same elephant, though she knew it was. Still, she searched. 3 weeks passed. Then one morning, a reply. A short email. I remember him. I remember everything. Is he okay? Leela responded instantly. They exchanged a few messages. And 5 days later, he arrived. Alex. Now 31. A little taller, a little more tired. But carrying the same photo, creased and soft at the edges like something that had been opened and folded 100 times. He didn't go to the enclosure immediately. Leela brought him through the back to the observation platform. Ramu stood exactly where he always did. Back to the sun. Head low. Still. Alex pressed his hand against the railing, the photo in his other hand. Do you want to try? Leela asked. Alex nodded. He stepped forward slowly, carefully. Down the slope. Toward the fence. Toward the elephant. At first, nothing happened. Ramu didn't move. Didn't turn. But then, his ears twitched. He lifted his head slightly. Then froze. Alex stopped 3 feet from the barrier. Ramu, he said softly. The elephant turned. Slowly. Deliberately. And looked at him. Directly. It was only a moment. But the air shifted. Then the photo fluttered in Alex's hand. And Ramu stepped forward. 1 step. Then another. Until he was inches from the fence. Alex didn't move. He simply held up the photo. Ramu stared at it. Then, with the softest motion imaginable, lowered his trunk and touched it. Lightly. Then again. And then he made a sound no one had heard from him in nearly a year. A rumble. Low. Deep. And filled with something so heavy it vibrated in the bones. Then he leaned forward. And gently rested his forehead against the fence right where Alex stood. The tears came again. But they were different now. Because for the first time in so long, they weren't only the elephants. Alex didn't expect to feel so much. He had told himself, on the plane, in the taxi, even while standing at the edge of the enclosure, that maybe he'd just imagined it. Maybe a photo and a memory were all he had left. Elephants forget too, don't they? It had been 2 decades. But when Ramu leaned his massive head against the fence and exhaled like the wind leaving a broken wall, Alex felt something break inside him. The past hadn't been forgotten. It had been waiting. That night, Leela insisted he stay in one of the guest huts near the sanctuary. He didn't argue. He didn't speak much at all. He just sat on the edge of the cot, staring at the photo, still damp at the edges from Ramu's touch. Outside, the sanctuary was quiet, but not silent. Somewhere in the distance, Ramu was rumbling. Not crying, just speaking soft, low vibrations in the earth. A language only elephants understood. But somehow, Alex felt it too. The next morning, Ramu was at the fence before sunrise, waiting. The staff hadn't seen him move like that in over a year. He usually lingered in the shadows until breakfast was left out, then slowly shuffled forward, barely touching his food. But now he stood tall, alert, present. Leela called Alex over. When Ramu saw him, he let out a breathy rumble and walked directly to the gate. The handlers froze. He hadn't approached anyone like that in months. It wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't distant either. Should I? Alex asked, hesitant. Leela nodded. If he wants to see you, let him. Alex stepped forward slowly. This time, he didn't bring the photo. He just brought himself. Ramu leaned into the gate again. Alex reached out, not expecting to be allowed to touch him, not really, but Ramu didn't pull back. He stayed. Still. Heavy and warm and enormous and unbelievably calm. Alex placed his palm on Ramu's forehead, just above the ridge between his eyes. And Ramu closed them. One of the handlers swore under his breath. Another wiped her eyes. Because Ramu wasn't just calm. He was content. That day, everything changed. Ramu followed Alex along the fence line as he walked. He reached out with his trunk, brushing against the bars as if asking him not to leave. At one point, when Alex crouched near a tree stump, Ramu simply stood beside him, casting his shadow over the man like an umbrella of memory. The sanctuary staff took photos. Videos. They didn't know what else to do. They were witnessing something they couldn't explain. An elephant who had given up on the world suddenly remembering how to live because someone from another lifetime had returned. Alex stayed for 3 days. By the second, Ramu was eating again. Not just picking at fruit, but fully chewing, using his trunk to lift and play with food like he used to. He bathed. He trumpeted, soft at first, like a throat clearing, then louder, as if testing the air. He even rejoined the other elephants during their daily walk. But he always looked back. Always kept his eye on one spot along the fence where Alex stood. They began walking together each morning, just the two of them. Ramu on his side of the enclosure, Alex on the path outside, keeping pace. It was almost ridiculous, an elephant and a man walking side by side, separated by metal and years. But it made sense to them. On the final evening, as the sun dipped low, Alex brought out an old voice recorder. A beat-up gray model with a cassette inside. He sat near the fence, legs crossed like in the photo. And pressed play. The sound was crackly but clear. A child's voice. Laughing. Singing softly. Ramu. Ramu. The elephant froze. Ears perked. He tilted his head. The sound repeated. Then the voice again. I love you, big guy. You're my favorite. Ramu didn't move for a long moment. Then he stepped forward and rested his trunk against the recorder. Not to knock it over. Not to touch it. Just to feel it. Like he remembered. Not just the voice, not just the sound, but the boy behind it. And now the man he'd become. That night, Alex didn't sleep much. He sat awake, watching the stars above the sanctuary, wondering how something so big and ancient could carry something so fragile for so long. And he wondered what else Ramu remembered. Not just the sound, but the silence that followed. And how, after 20 years, someone finally answered it. The next morning, Ramu was waiting before sunrise. He stood near the gate, swaying gently from foot to foot, his trunk occasionally lifting to taste the air. The light was still blue and soft when Alex walked down the path with a cup of tea in his hand and a tightness in his chest. It was his last day. He had told the staff, but not Ramu. As he approached, Ramu let out a low, soft rumble and stepped forward, closing the distance without hesitation. The bond between them had become something that no one could deny. It was beyond memory now. It had become presence. Alex rested his hand on the fence and the elephant leaned into it. Hey, big guy, Alex whispered. He didn't say much else. There was too much he wanted to say and none of it would come out right. Leela stood back, watching. He knows, she said gently. Alex turned. Knows what? That you're leaving. Alex sighed and looked back at the elephant. I didn't want him to. You don't have to say it out loud. He can feel it. Alex stared into Ramu's eyes. There was something deep in them. Something steady and old and impossibly kind. Not desperation. Not sadness. Acceptance. The elephant wasn't begging him to stay. He was saying thank you. Later that morning, Ramu followed Alex along the fence one last time. They walked the full path down by the watering hole, past the mango tree, along the low stone wall that separated the enclosure from the forest. At the end of the walk, Ramu stopped. Alex did too. They stood facing each other across the fence. Alex pulled something from his backpack. The photo. The same one from all those years ago. Creased and smudged at the corners, a little faded but still clear enough to see the boy and the baby elephant locked in a moment no one else had ever understood. He held it up. Ramu stepped closer. Touched it again. And then gently Alex slid it through the bars and let it fall to the ground. Ramu lowered his trunk and lifted the photo. He didn't tear it. He didn't drop it. He just held it for a while. And then placed it carefully in the grass. Alex swallowed the lump in his throat. "I'll come back," he said, though he wasn't sure if it was true. Ramu blinked slowly. Then raised his trunk. Not high. Just enough. And made a low, rising sound. A trumpet, softer than a song. A goodbye. When Alex left the sanctuary, he didn't look back right away. He rode in silence, hands resting on his lap, head turned toward the window. It was only when they were halfway down the road at the bend near the trees that he looked out and saw a figure on the hill. Still. Watching. Ramu. Standing tall, trunk curled against his chest, facing the road even though Alex was too far to see clearly. But Alex saw him. And that was enough. Back home, everything felt different. The city was too loud. The streets too crowded. People rushed, hurried, forgot each other's names within moments. No one paused to remember. No one held anything that long. But Ramu had. For 20 years. Alex hung the photo on his wall. Next to it, he placed the cassette tape, now digitalized and stored safely. When friends came over and asked about the elephant, he would tell them a version of the story. But not the whole thing. Some parts he kept for himself. Some bonds, he learned, didn't need to be explained. They just needed to be honored. And across the world, in a quiet sanctuary, the elephant that once cried alone now walked each day with the others. He played again. Bathed again. Ate with full hunger. He never returned to the far corner of the enclosure. Never stood alone by the fence again. But every now and then when the sky turned gold and the world slowed down, he would pause by the tree near the gate and gently lower his trunk to the ground, where, tucked in a small hollow beneath the roots, the photo still rested. Seasons shifted. The monsoons came and went, soaking the sanctuary in deep greens. The mango trees bore fruit and dropped them by the dozens. New elephants arrived, rescued, frightened, broken in different ways. Some were loud. Some aggressive. Some silent, like Ramu once was. But Ramu was no longer broken. He had become something else. A guide. A guardian. He moved through the sanctuary with purpose, slow and dignified, often walking alongside the youngest calves. He stood near them when they were afraid of thunder. He shared his water trough. He didn't need to be the leader. He was simply present, and that presence brought calm. The staff noticed how the others responded to him. They started calling him the Old Soul. He didn't trumpet often. But when he did, it was low and resonant, like a memory the wind carried across the trees. Alex wrote occasionally. Emails, mostly. Simple updates, photos from his quiet life. He kept his promises to himself, no grand documentaries, no press, no speeches. Just remembrance. In one email, he sent a painting he'd commissioned. It showed two figures, a young boy and a small elephant standing beneath a tree. No fence. No lines between them. The background faded into gold. Leela had it framed and placed in the sanctuary's visitor center. No plaque. No names. Just the image. Visitors stopped in front of it every day. Some smiled. Some didn't say a word. But almost everyone felt something. Because even without the story, the bond spoke for itself. One morning, several years after that first reunion, a new volunteer arrived. She was fresh out of school, bright-eyed, asking too many questions. Leela didn't mind. Most volunteers came and went quickly, not strong enough to face the slow work of healing. But this one stayed. She noticed Ramu right away. There was something different about him, she said. Something you could feel before you saw him. He didn't act like the others. Didn't demand attention. But the space around him always felt quieter. As if time moved slower near him. Does he still wait for the man? She asked one afternoon. Leela looked up. What man? The one from the painting. Leela smiled. He doesn't wait. Not anymore. The girl tilted her head. How do you know? Leela didn't answer right away. She just pointed toward the old mango tree near the fence line. The girl followed her gaze. There, under the tree's roots, a small metal box had been placed. Leela walked her over and knelt beside it. Inside was the photograph. A little faded, edges curled, but still intact. Next to it, a cassette tape, labeled in worn ink, Ramu, 2003. And beside both, one of Ramu's fallen tusk shavings carefully cleaned, placed like a keepsake. The girl looked up at Leela, eyes wide. He left them here, she asked. Leela shook her head. No. He brings others here. The young ones. When they're scared. She paused. It's not a shrine. It's a reminder that we all come from somewhere. And sometimes we find our way back. That evening, Ramu stood at the top of the hill again. The same one where he had watched Alex's car disappear all those years ago. His eyes weren't clouded. His legs weren't weak. He was old, yes, but whole. Below, the sanctuary bustled, handlers preparing food, elephants rustling in their pens, birds gathering in the banyan trees. But Ramu didn't move. He watched the horizon where the light dimmed to violet. Not because he expected someone. Not because he was waiting. But because this was the place where the boy had returned. And where grief had ended. He stood a while longer. Then turned. And walked back into the heart of the sanctuary. Where others now waited. Where healing was no longer a memory. But something he gave every single day.